She wasn't supposed to stand out. Two 12-year-old girls in matching Navy uniforms, badges gleaming softly under the airport lights. They were supposed to blend in, not ignite a chain reaction that would stop planes across the nation. But that morning at Gate 47, something small, a single act of arrogance, would unravel everything the airline thought it controlled. This isn't one of those loud revenge stories where people scream for payback. This one starts with silence, a bruise, and a quiet stare that froze an entire system. The morning sun slipped through the high glass walls of Dallas-Fort Worth Airport, washing the terminal in pale gold. Ava Johnson walked 3 steps ahead of her twin sister, Aria, their pace perfectly in sync. Each carried a single navy blue duffel bag, neatly tagged Gold Star Family Representative. They looked calm, maybe too calm for 2 kids traveling alone. No parents, no escort. Just their mother's flag folded carefully between their clothes. The same flag that would be handed back to them today at the Defense Honors Ceremony in Washington, D.C. Ava's shoes clicked softly against the floor. She didn't speak. Aria didn't either. They had learned early that silence kept people comfortable. When adults saw quiet children, they assumed everything was fine. But everything wasn't fine. Their mother, Captain Elaine Johnson, had died 6 months earlier in a rescue mission overseas. Her name was printed on the military letter that now stayed tucked inside Ava's coat pocket, the one she refused to read again. "Gate 47, Aria said, almost in a whisper. Ava nodded. The gate was already crowded. Businessmen in suits typed furiously on laptops. Women in heels scrolled through phones. Flight attendants moved like choreography, all practiced smiles and clipped tones. Ava held her boarding pass tightly. She'd been told someone from the airline would meet them here, maybe walk them through boarding, maybe just check they were okay. But no one came. She scanned the crowd. No one even looked their way. An older man across from them chuckled at something on his phone. 2 teenage boys snickered, nudging each other. One of them pointed. "Hey, look, the little Navy twins. Maybe they're filming a TikTok." Ava's jaw tightened. Aria looked down. They were used to it. The misunderstanding, the way adults turned service into spectacle. It still stung. Their mother had always said, "Dignity isn't how others see you. It's how you hold your ground when no one else does." Ava tried to remember that now. The loudspeaker chimed. "Falcon Jetline Flight 227 to Washington, D.C., now boarding first-class passengers." The twins stepped forward, moving to the rope divider where a flight attendant stood. Tall, sharp uniform, flawless red lipstick, and a look that could slice glass. Her name tag read Veronica Pike, Senior Cabin Crew. Veronica looked the twins up and down, one eyebrow arching. "Sweethearts," she said, voice dripping with syrup, "this line is for first-class passengers only." Ava held out their passes. "We have first-class seats," she said quietly. Veronica didn't even glance at them. "Right. And I'm the Queen of England." She turned toward the gate agent. "Can we get security here? We've got a situation." Aria's cheeks flushed. "We're not lying, ma'am. We're traveling under the Department of Defense program." She pointed to the small silver badge pinned to Ava's chest, a simple oval marked with an eagle and 3 stars. Veronica squinted. "That's cute. Did you get that from a costume store?" A few passengers nearby chuckled under their breath. Ava swallowed hard. "It's real." The flight attendant's smile dropped. "Don't argue with me, young lady. Step aside." The tone of command, the dismissive wave, it wasn't just rude. It was something deeper, colder. Ava felt her pulse quicken, but her voice stayed calm. "We're traveling to receive our mother's flag, ma'am. I don't care who you're visiting," Veronica snapped. "You don't belong in this line." A hush fell around them. Even the gate agent froze, unsure. Ava could feel everyone watching now. The stares, the whispers, the quiet judgment that pressed down like a weight. Her fingers brushed the badge again. The metal was warm from her skin. Aria tugged her sleeve. "Ava, let's just go." But Ava didn't move. Not yet. Behind her, a businessman shifted uncomfortably. "Ma'am," he said to the attendant. "I think—" Veronica shot him a look that shut him down immediately. The air thickened. In that moment, Ava understood exactly what her mother had meant. That there were moments when silence hurt more than shouting, when doing nothing felt like betrayal. Her throat tightened, but she forced herself to meet Veronica's gaze. The woman crossed her arms. "I said step aside." Ava didn't. Veronica's hand twitched, just slightly at first. Then came the slap. A hard, open-handed strike across Ava's left cheek. The sound cracked through the gate like a whip. Everything stopped. Arya gasped. The businessman dropped his coffee. Someone's phone hit the floor. No one spoke. Ava stood perfectly still, the outline of the woman's fingers already reddening on her skin. For a long, unbearable second, nothing existed but that sound echoing in her head. The slap, the laughter, the quiet humiliation. Then she bent down slowly, picked up the badge that had fallen to the ground, and brushed off the dust with her sleeve. The metal glinted under the light, bright, cold, and steady. Arya's voice trembled. "Ava, please." But Ava's face had gone blank, the kind of calm that doesn't mean peace, but control. Without a word, she tucked the badge back against her chest. Somewhere deep inside, something had shifted. The sound of the slap still lingered in the air like an echo that refused to die. Gate 47 had gone completely silent. No chatter, no keyboard clacks, no boarding announcements. Just that stunned kind of silence that makes people stare without daring to move. Ava's cheek burned. The print of Veronica Pike's hand was still there, raw against her skin. But she didn't cry. She wouldn't. She could feel Arya trembling beside her, trying to take her hand, but Ava stayed still. Across the gate, people shifted uneasily. A man in a tailored gray suit looked like he wanted to say something, then lowered his eyes. A woman muttered, "Kids these days always push too far." Another whispered, "That attendant shouldn't have done that. Should she?" No one stepped forward, not even the gate agent. Veronica adjusted her uniform jacket and straightened her collar as if nothing had happened. "Next passenger," she said sharply, her voice slicing through the tension. "Let's keep the line moving." Her tone, so calm, so entitled, made Arya's stomach twist. She pulled on Ava's sleeve. "Let's go to another gate," she whispered. Ava's lips barely moved. "No, Mom taught us to stand when dignity's on the line." Veronica caught the words. "Excuse me?" she snapped. "Did you say something?" Ava lifted her eyes. They were glassy but steady. "I said my mom taught me to stand when dignity's on the line, ma'am." A hush rippled through the gate. For a moment, it seemed like even the air conditioning paused. Veronica's jaw tightened. "Don't get smart with me. You're not the first child who thought wearing a fake badge would get you special treatment." "It's not fake," Arya said softly, her voice cracking. Veronica spun toward her. "Then tell me where your parents are." Ava answered before Arya could. "Our mom's name is Captain Elaine Johnson. She's buried at Arlington. We're flying to accept her flag." The words hit harder than any slap could. A few passengers looked up now, their eyes widening, but still. They said nothing. Silence can be cruel when it's filled with cowardice. Veronica blinked, caught off guard for half a second, then scoffed. "Everyone's got a story. But rules are rules. You're not on this list." She motioned to the boarding roster in her hand without checking it. "So step aside before I call airport security." Arya's breathing quickened. Her small fists clenched around her duffel strap. "Ava, please," she murmured, barely audible. Ava didn't move. She could feel her pulse in her ears. This isn't about a seat, she thought. It's about being seen. Behind them, a businessman cleared his throat. "Ma'am, maybe check their tickets again." Veronica turned, voice dripping venom. "Sir, please mind your own business unless you'd like to be rebooked on another flight." That shut him up. He looked away, pretending to read an email that wasn't there. Ava and Arya stood alone now. Two small figures surrounded by people pretending they didn't exist. Veronica leaned forward, lowering her voice to a whisper sharp enough to cut. You think that little badge makes you special? You're just another kid playing dress-up. Ava looked down at the badge pinned above her heart. The metal was warm from her skin, the engraved eagle catching the light. She remembered her mother's hands when she pinned it there the night before deployment. If anyone ever questions your place, she'd said, show them this, then stand tall. Ava raised her head. Her voice came out steady. I'm not playing. Veronica's smile vanished. Security will decide that. She reached out, again, for the badge. Ava instinctively stepped back. Arya gasped. You will not touch that, Ava said, and for the first time, her voice carried. It wasn't loud, but it was clear, unmistakably firm. The gate agent behind the counter froze mid-typing. The man in the gray suit stopped pretending to look at his phone. The entire line stilled again. Something shifted in the air. Veronica's nostrils flared. I've had enough of this, she hissed, turning toward the gate agent. Call TSA, now! The agent hesitated. Ms. Pike, maybe... Now! Veronica snapped. Ava exhaled slowly. She didn't want to make a scene. She didn't want to make anyone afraid. But she also wasn't going to let her mother's memory be mocked by someone who saw kindness as weakness. She turned to Arya. Don't be scared. Arya's eyes were glassy. I'm not scared, she whispered. I'm angry. Veronica's voice boomed again. Step aside, both of you. No one moved. Ava could feel the weight of every stare pressing down on her back. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to scream. But mostly, she wanted someone, anyone, to do the right thing. No one did. Her heart pounded once, twice, steady like a drumbeat she couldn't ignore. Mom wouldn't have backed down, she thought. Not for rank, not for fear. She reached for the badge again, fingers brushing over the smooth surface. Underneath the metal was something no one else could see, a small pressure plate, linked to a biometric chip. Her mother had told her about it. For emergencies only, honey, when silence becomes dangerous. The irony of that line hit her now. Silence was dangerous. It was killing her dignity inch by inch. Veronica sighed loudly, rolling her eyes for the crowd. You know what? I don't have time for this. She turned away, motioning to the next passenger. Ava's cheek still burned, but deeper than the sting, she felt something colder. Resolve. She took a breath. Come on, Arya. Her sister hesitated. Where are we going? Ava looked toward the boarding sign blinking gate 47, Falcon Jet Line 227. To board, she said simply. They walked forward together, two small figures cutting through a sea of indifference. The crowd parted just enough to let them pass. For a moment, no one spoke. The only sound was their shoes tapping against the polished tile, the rhythm too steady for fear. Veronica's voice shot out behind them like a whip. Don't you dare! The twins didn't look back. Ava could feel her mother walking with her, not in some magical way, but in memory, in marrow. Every step said what her voice didn't need to. You can take our place in line, but not our right to be here. By the time they reached the jet bridge rope, the lights overhead flickered. It was subtle, a blink, a glitch maybe, but Ava noticed. She looked down at her badge again. It wasn't glowing. Not yet, but it would. She didn't know that in less than 10 minutes, the same silence that humiliated them would bring an entire airline to its knees. And no one at Gate 47, not Veronica, not the passengers, not even the man who finally looked up from his phone, had the faintest idea that justice was already in motion. The boarding line had stopped moving. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Veronica Pike's voice had turned sharp, almost trembling with anger masked as authority. I said step aside, she barked again, each syllable slicing the air. Ava Johnson stood her ground. Her posture wasn't defiant. It was dignified. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't plead. She just stood, holding her torn boarding pass and the badge pressed close to her chest. Beside her, Aria's hands were shaking. The younger twin whispered, "Ava, please. We can wait for the next flight." Ava didn't answer. Her mother's words echoed in her head. Sometimes silence is the only protest that people can't ignore. Veronica stepped closer, the scent of expensive perfume cutting through the sterile airport air. "You think being quiet makes you brave? You're holding up the line. You're wasting everyone's time." No one moved behind them. No one spoke up either. The silence thickened, pressing in like humidity before a storm. Ava's throat burned. She wanted to scream, but something told her that if she did, the world would treat her like every other loud child, not a daughter carrying the weight of her mother's service. Veronica bent down, her face just inches from Ava's. "You don't belong here," she hissed. "This cabin is for real passengers." Ava's jaw clenched. "We are," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Don't talk back to me," Veronica snapped. The attendant's hand shot forward, fingers gripping Ava's arm. She tried to snatch the badge again, but Ava twisted slightly, protecting it. That movement, that small act of refusal, broke Veronica's composure completely. "You little—" The slap came without warning, a full, open-handed strike that echoed through Gate 47 like a gunshot. The sound of skin hitting skin was sharp, final, and horrifyingly loud. Ava stumbled half a step sideways. Aria screamed, not loud, but enough to make heads turn. The businessman dropped his phone. A woman gasped. Someone muttered, "Oh my God." And then, just like that, silence swallowed the terminal. Veronica froze, realizing what she'd done, but pride wouldn't let her back down. "Maybe now you'll learn your place," she said coldly, shaking out her hand as if she'd swatted a fly. Ava lifted her head slowly. Her cheek throbbed, but her eyes were dry, calm, unreadable. "Are you done?" she asked. Veronica blinked. "Excuse me?" Ava straightened her collar, brushed the dust from her sleeve, and looked the woman dead in the eye. "I asked if you're done, ma'am." The quietness in her tone didn't sound like fear. It sounded like power, too controlled to be anything else. No one dared to breathe. Aria rushed to her sister's side, cupping her face, whispering, "You're bleeding." Ava touched the corner of her lip, a faint trace of red on her fingertip. She looked at it for a moment, then smiled weakly. "It's fine." "It's not fine," Aria said, tears welling. Ava shook her head. "She doesn't deserve that much of our energy." The gate agent, pale and nervous, finally found his voice. Miss Pike, maybe we should—" "I said I'll handle it," Veronica snapped, her face blotched red with anger. "Security will be here in 2 minutes." Ava turned to Aria and whispered, "That's all the time we need." Then she crouched, picking up the badge that had fallen from her chest. The small oval of silver lay face down on the floor, reflecting the fluorescent lights above. When she flipped it over, a soft blue light blinked once, an automatic scan recognizing her fingerprint. Aria froze. "Ava, are you?" Ava pressed her thumb firmly against the center. The light blinked again, blue, then red. A faint chime sounded from somewhere above the gate. Veronica rolled her eyes. "What is that? You kids playing with toys now?" Ava said quietly. "You should probably call the Department of Defense instead." Veronica laughed, loud and mocking. "Oh, please, stop pretending." Then the lights flickered, not just above Gate 47, but across the entire terminal. Every screen, every flight status board, every digital gate number flashed once and went dark. The loudspeaker cut out mid-sentence. Passengers gasped. Phones stopped connecting. The silence turned electric. The gate agent stared at his monitor. Miss Pike, all systems are down." Veronica frowned, tapping her earpiece. "Operations? This is Gate 47. I need—" Static. Nothing. And then an automated voice rolled through the loudspeaker. "Attention! Gray flag protocol initiated. Joint operations temporarily suspended." The words hung heavy in the air. Ava stood completely still. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She just watched as chaos unfolded around her. Security officers began running toward the gate. Airport staff scrambled, whispering into dead radios. Aria clutched Ava's hand. "What's happening?" Ava's voice stayed even. "It's okay. They'll listen now." On a giant monitor behind the counter, new text appeared in bold red. Gray flag level 2. Awaiting federal authorization, 9 airports across the eastern corridor simultaneously lit up the same message. Flights were grounded, rerouted, delayed. Passengers panicked. Phones buzzed with news alerts. Nationwide technical outage halts flights, but at Gate 47, one person stood motionless, Veronica Pike. She turned to Ava, her voice trembling. "What did you do?" Ava looked up at her with that same calm, steady expression. "We didn't do anything wrong, ma'am." Aria squeezed her hand. "Ava, we should tell them who you are." Ava shook her head gently. "They'll find out?" One of the guards approached cautiously. "Miss, did you trigger that system?" Ava met his eyes. Only the system that needed to wake up. He hesitated, unsure how to respond. Behind him, the airport announcement crackled to life again. A deep, authoritative male voice this time. "This is the Department of Defense Joint Aviation Command. All personnel stand by. Gray flag protocol verified at Gate 47. Every officer in the area froze. Veronica's face drained of color. Ava and Aria stood together in the middle of the gate. 2 tiny figures in an ocean of confusion, holding hands, not saying a word. Aria looked up at her sister. "Are we in trouble?" Ava's voice was soft, almost kind. "No, we're in history." No one at Gate 47 dared to speak. The air was thick, a mix of confusion, shame, and fear. The terminal lights glowed faintly, flickering every few seconds. And the huge digital board that once listed flight numbers now displayed only one message. "Gray flag protocol, hold position." Passengers who just minutes ago were rolling their eyes or sipping coffee now stood perfectly still, whispering under their breath as if sound itself might break something fragile. In the center of it all stood Ava and Aria Johnson. 2 12-year-old girls, side by side, too calm for what had just happened. Ava's cheek still burned from the slap, but she didn't touch it. She didn't cry. She didn't even blink much. She just looked forward, eyes glassy, steady, the way her mother used to when she was giving orders before deployment. Beside her, Aria's breathing was uneven. Her twin could always tell when she was holding back tears. Her shoulders went rigid first. Her chin trembled second. Ava reached out and squeezed her hand. "It's okay," Ava whispered. Aria shook her head, voice small. "It's not." For a long second, they just stood there, surrounded by murmurs and blinking lights. Behind them, Veronica Pike, the flight attendant who had hit Ava, had gone pale. Her voice, once loud and certain, had vanished into a whisper. This has to be a mistake," she muttered, clutching her headset. "It's a system error, that's all." The gate agent didn't answer. He looked at her with wide eyes, the kind that quietly say, "You've gone too far." Ava slowly turned to face Veronica. Her tone was calm, almost polite. "You asked for security," she said. "They'll be here soon." It wasn't a threat. It wasn't anger. It was simply a statement, the truth said softly enough to sting. Veronica's throat tightened. "I didn't mean," Ava cut her off gently. "You meant to make us small." The sentence hit like a quiet bullet. People who had been pretending not to watch were now openly staring. The silence had turned heavy, not comfortable, not peaceful, but alive. Aria's eyes darted nervously from face to face. "They're all looking," she whispered. "Good," Ava said. "Let them." One man, the same businessman who had dropped his phone earlier, finally spoke. "Is someone going to explain what's happening?" No one answered him. Not yet. Ava took a small breath. "Aria," she said quietly, "do you remember what Mom used to say about fear?" Aria nodded faintly. "That it only grows if we feed it." "Right. Ava's tone was so calm it almost sounded like routine. So don't feed it. The younger twin tried, but her lip trembled anyway. Ava, what if they arrest us? Ava shook her head. They won't. How do you know? Because the truth is bigger than all of this. She looked down at the badge pinned over her chest. It wasn't glowing anymore, but it felt warm, like it remembered what it had just done. Gray Flag Protocol. The words meant nothing to most people here, but Ava knew exactly what they carried. Dignity codes, military honor regulations, emergency protections for the families of fallen service members. Her mother had explained it once, late one night after dinner. If you ever activate it, it'll stop everything. It's not a weapon, Ava. It's a warning, one the world can't ignore. Ava had never thought she'd actually use it, until now. She glanced at her sister, who still looked torn between fear and disbelief. Arya, it's okay. It's supposed to stop the noise. The noise? The kind that hurts people. A pause stretched between them, soft, tender, almost sacred. Then Arya's voice broke, small and aching. You didn't deserve that, Ava. Ava looked at her, eyes glistening now. Neither did Mom. That silence right after, it wasn't empty anymore. It was full of pain, of memory, of something too big for words. The officer who had arrived moments earlier approached slowly, hand on his earpiece. Ladies, he said carefully, I need to ask if you understand what you've just done. Ava nodded once. We followed protocol. The officer hesitated. And you knew it would do this? Not this much, Ava said honestly. But we knew it would make them listen. Her tone was still calm, eerily calm. And that's what made the officer pause. He looked around the gate, at the frightened passengers, the blinking screens, the panicked airline staff, and then back at the two children who somehow weren't afraid. Veronica stepped forward, desperate now. You have no idea what you've just caused. You grounded half the network. People could lose their jobs. Ava tilted her head. Then maybe they'll learn to keep their hands to themselves. Veronica opened her mouth, but no words came out. The truth had already stripped her power bare. Arya reached for her sister's hand again. Ava, I don't want to be the reason people lose their jobs. Ava squeezed gently. You're not. You're the reason they'll remember what respect looks like. The officer's radio crackled softly. Then a deep voice came through. Confirm identity. Johnson twins, dependents of Captain Elaine Johnson. Authorization code verified. Maintain security. Await further instruction. Everyone froze again. Even Veronica. The officer lowered his radio and looked at them. Not with suspicion anymore, but with something closer to awe. Miss Johnson, he said quietly. We're standing by. Ava nodded once. Thank you. The officer stepped back. No one dared to interfere after that. For the next several minutes, time seemed to stretch. The terminal lights glowed dim, the air hum of engines fading outside. People started sitting down, not because they were told to, but because they felt the weight of what had just happened. The gate that once belonged to an airline now belonged to a lesson. Ava finally sat too, her legs tucked neatly, posture straight. She placed the badge in her lap, rubbing her thumb over the engraved eagle. Arya leaned close, whispering, What now? Ava's voice softened. Now we wait. For what? For them to understand. The younger twin frowned. Do you think they will? Ava smiled faintly, the kind of smile that carried both pain and peace. Eventually. The world always listens. It just takes the right kind of silence to make it hear. The camera of a nearby passenger clicked quietly. A photo snapped without flash. In that image, two girls sat side by side beneath a darkened gate sign, holding hands, surrounded by a world that had finally stopped moving long enough to feel what dignity looks like. That image would be the one shared later, the one that broke the story, that made people ask who were they, and why did everything stop for them. But for now, Ava and Arya didn't care about any of that. They sat in silence. Not the silence of fear, or guilt, or defeat, but the kind that humbles an entire room. The world had stopped moving. But Ava's heartbeat hadn't. It was the only sound she could hear now. Steady, controlled, almost defiant. Gate 47 was still on lockdown. The lights buzzed faintly. The speakers played nothing but white noise, and every airport employee looked trapped between duty and disbelief. Veronica Pike, the flight attendant who had hit her, stood a few feet away, trying to keep her posture straight, though her voice trembled when she muttered, This can't be happening. But it was happening. And Ava knew it wasn't just because she'd pressed her badge. It was because of what that badge represented. A promise buried deep in the system, one her mother had told her about once, like a secret bedtime story with rules instead of dragons. Ava turned the badge over in her palm now, tracing the engraved eagle, the 3 stars, the smooth indentation where her thumb fit perfectly. Arya leaned closer, whispering, "It's glowing again." The faint red light pulsed beneath the metal. Slow, steady, alive. "It's verifying," Ava said softly. "Verifying what?" "That we meant it." The screen above the gate flickered once more. New text rolled across it. "Gray flag confirmation pending. Secondary oath required." The gate agent gasped. "It's asking for a second clearance?" Arya looked at her sister, confused. "What does that mean?" Ava didn't answer right away. She just stared at the badge, then at her twin. "It means it wants both of us." Her mother had designed it that way, Ava remembered now. When their mom first handed them each a matching badge pendant on a chain, she had said, "One alone can alert the system, but 2 together? That's the fail-safe. That's when the world truly listens." Ava turned to Arya. "Put your hand on it." "What?" "Just trust me." Arya hesitated, glancing nervously at the people around them. The gate had gone quiet again, dozens of passengers watching, phones recording, breaths held. "Do it," Ava said gently. Arya placed her trembling fingers over Ava's hand. The metal warmed instantly. The light changed, red to gold. A soft chime echoed through the air, so subtle it sounded like wind chimes from far away. The monitors across the gate glitched, lines of code flashing too fast for anyone to read. Then a new message appeared in bold white text against a black screen. "Twin confirmation, active." The crowd murmured. The airport security guards exchanged bewildered looks. And somewhere far from Dallas, in Washington, in New York, in Chicago, in Seattle, screens lit up in quiet unison. 9 airports, 9 gates, 1 identical signal. Every single one displayed the same message. Gray flag verified. Federal override engaged. Veronica stumbled backward, her voice cracking. "What is this? What did you do?" Ava didn't even look at her. She stood taller now, voice steady. "We reminded the system it was built to protect people, not humiliate them." The words came out calm, measured, and far too adult for a 12-year-old. But that was exactly why they hit harder. One passenger whispered, "She's just a kid." Another replied, "Not anymore." Ava turned toward Arya, who looked pale but strangely composed. "It's not going to hurt anyone," Ava reassured her. "It just stops everything until they listen." "Who?" Arya asked. "The ones who forgot what respect means." Arya's lip quivered. "Do you think Mom would be proud of us?" Ava blinked. "I think she'd tell us to breathe, and to keep our heads high." For the first time that day, Arya smiled. Small, tired, but real. In the corner, the gate agent's phone buzzed. He answered with shaky hands. "This is Gate 47, DFW. We're in gray flag. Repeat, gray flag activation confirmed. 2 minors. Yes, dependents of Captain Elaine Johnson." The man's eyes widened. "Yes, sir, I understand." He hung up slowly and turned to the crowd. "The Department of Defense has taken over this gate. They said to let the children be." No one breathed for a moment. Then someone, a woman in a business suit, spoke up softly. "They're those Johnson girls?" Ava didn't react, but Arya's shoulders tightened. People were starting to realize who they were. Whispers spread fast. Their mom died in Helmand, right? Wait, are they the ones from that honor ceremony? Oh my God, she hit one of them? Veronica's face drained of color. This isn't, she stammered. I didn't know. But no one wanted to hear her anymore. Her authority had collapsed, not because someone yelled, but because two quiet girls had refused to. Ava sat down on the floor again, cross-legged like she had before. Aria sat beside her, their hands still joined over the badge. Veronica tried to approach, but the security guard held up a hand. Ma'am, I think you should step back. She looked at him bewildered. They're children. He shook his head. Not in this moment, they're not. The faint hum of the airport systems returned. But now, everything was moving differently. Slower, deliberate, controlled. The rush of engines outside had ceased. Planes sat idle. Screens flashed, on hold, in red. The world hadn't ended. It had paused. And sometimes, that's all it takes to make people remember who they've become. Ava's thoughts drifted to her mother, to the bedtime stories not about princesses or soldiers, but about ethics, leadership, and what she called the gravity of choice. You're going to grow up in a world that forgets to listen, her mother had said. When that happens, don't shout. Make the silence heavier until they hear it. That's what this was. Not rebellion, not revenge, just gravity. Veronica stood by the wall now, watching the two girls sit quietly under the blinking lights. She didn't say another word. For the first time in her 18-year career, she didn't have one. And across the country, in control rooms filled with blinking servers and murmuring officials, grown men and women stared at the data feed labeled Gray Flag 47, initiated by minor dependents. They didn't know what to call it yet. A breach, an incident, a miracle. But they all understood the message. Someone small had reminded the system what power was supposed to look like. Ava's cheeks still ached, but the fire inside her had changed. It wasn't anger anymore, it was purpose. She looked at Aria, who was watching the badge glow softly in their joined hands. See? Ava said gently. It's not about fighting back. Then what is it about? Aria asked. Ava's eyes softened. It's about standing still, until the world remembers how to move right again. It started with one sound, a soft chime from the badge in Ava's hand. But by the time that sound reached its final echo, the entire nation was listening. At Gate 47, Dallas-Fort Worth International, the crowd had become a mirror of disbelief. Phones filmed, screens froze, and the people who once ignored two quiet girls now stared as if they were watching history unfold in real time. The silence that had begun as humiliation had grown into something much larger. A silence that demanded attention. Ava looked down at the badge. The gold light that had pulsed between her and Aria now glowed steadily, brighter, stronger. The small device was no bigger than a matchbox, yet it was connected to something massive. The Skylock ethics system, her mother's last legacy before she died in the field. Across the terminal, a voice over the loudspeaker broke through the static. Attention all personnel. Gray flag verification confirmed. All Falcon jetline operations temporarily suspended pending review. Whispers rippled through the gate like wind through tall grass. Passengers gasped, attendants froze, and Veronica Pike, who had struck Ava not 10 minutes ago, took an involuntary step backward. What does that mean? She stammered. The gate agent swallowed hard. It means the airline's grounded. All of them. The ripple began spreading, unseen but unstoppable. At LAX, a pilot's headset crackled with the same message. Gray flag, level 2, hold at gate. At JFK, boarding screens blinked red. At Seattle-Tacoma, a flight ready for takeoff was ordered back to the terminal. 9 airports, 9 different cities, all paused, all silent. The effect was eerie, almost spiritual. In Dallas, a woman in uniform, not airline, not TSA, entered Gate 47 quietly. Her posture was military. She walked straight to the twins and knelt to their level. Miss Ava Johnson? She asked softly. Ava nodded. I'm Lieutenant Carr from Joint Aviation Oversight. We received the signal. Are you both okay? Arya nodded hesitantly. Ava didn't answer. She just looked down at the badge in her hand. It worked, she whispered. The lieutenant smiled faintly, not prideful, respectful. Yes, it did. She turned to the gate staff. This gate is now under federal review. Please step back. Veronica tried to protest. You can't just... The lieutenant's eyes flicked toward her, sharp and calm. Ma'am, I'd advise you not to finish that sentence. That tone, precise, practiced, unshakable, made everyone else fall silent again. Ava exhaled, feeling her body finally loosen. Arya leaned into her shoulder, whispering, Did we do something bad? Ava hesitated. We did something right. It just feels heavy. Arya frowned. Like when Mom used to say duty isn't about being brave. It's about standing still. Ava smiled faintly. Exactly like that. On the other side of the terminal glass, cameras were already flashing. A passenger had uploaded the video to social media. The slap, the silence, the flickering lights. And it was spreading faster than any press release ever could. Flight attendant hits child in military uniform. Airport shuts down minutes later. Gray flag. What is this mysterious military alert? Who are the Johnson twins? The hashtags were multiplying by the second. #Gate47, #Gold Star Twins, #Dignity Protocol. People didn't even know what they were watching yet. They just knew it felt important. Veronica sank into a chair. Her perfect red lipstick now looked like war paint cracking under sweat. It was just a misunderstanding, she said weakly. The lieutenant looked at her, then at Ava's cheek, still red. No, ma'am. It was a reminder. The phrase hit Veronica harder than any punishment could. Ava turned her gaze toward the window. Outside, planes sat frozen on the tarmac like sleeping giants. She'd never realized before how powerful stillness could look. Her mother had once said, when you stop movement, people have to look up. And right now, the entire aviation world was looking up, not at the sky, but at what dignity really meant. In a control room in Washington, D.C., a digital map lit up red across 9 cities. A man in uniform, General Donovan Brooks, leaned over the screen, jaw set, eyes steady. He spoke into a headset. Confirm the Johnson signal. Confirmed, sir, replied a voice. 2 dependents. Gold Star classification. Protocol engaged at 1423 Central. Brooks closed his eyes briefly. It's happening again. A younger officer beside him asked, Sir, do we intervene? Brooks shook his head. No, we let the system teach what lectures never could. Back at gate 47, Arya's breathing slowed. Ava, she whispered, do you think they'll forgive her? Ava followed her sister's gaze to Veronica, sitting pale and silent near the corner. Forgiveness isn't the point, Ava said quietly. Understanding is. Arya thought about that for a moment. Then, what happens next? Ava's fingers brushed the badge again, the light now dimming to a soft silver. Now the grown-ups have to decide if they still remember what honor looks like. By nightfall, the story had already made national news. Commentators debated on live TV talking about military ethics, passenger dignity, and systemic accountability. But what none of them realized, at least not yet, was that this wasn't an accident of technology. It was the start of a cultural reset. A 12-year-old girl had touched a badge and stopped the largest transportation network in the country, not out of revenge, but to remind the world that respect wasn't optional. Back in the terminal, Ava finally leaned her head against her sister's shoulder. You okay? Arya asked softly. I think so, Ava said. It's just strange. I didn't think something this small could be that loud. Arya smiled faintly. Mom said silence travels farther than noise. Ava chuckled quietly. She was right. They sat there together, 2 small silhouettes under the cold glow of the gate lights, surrounded by adults who finally understood what it meant to stop and listen. The ripple had only just begun. But it would keep spreading, from one badge to one gate to one world that had forgotten how to pause. And in that pause, a pair of twins had reminded everyone what dignity still sounded like. By the time the second chime faded from the speakers, the map behind the gate agent's desk was glowing like a constellation put under glass. Red nodes pulsed over DFW, LAX, JFK, CA, DEN, ATL, BOS, MIA, ORD, 9 airports, 9 simultaneous holds. The caption beneath the live board said only, "Gray flag level 2, maintain position." The terminal's soundscape, rolling luggage, soft boarding calls, idle conversations, had evaporated. Stillness pushed into every corner. Out on the tarmac, pushback trucks waited with engines idling, crews holding up neon wands that no longer meant go, just wait. Planes sat heavy and quiet like sleeping animals that refused to be roused. Ava didn't move. The badge rested in her lap, its gold pulse dimming to a steady silver. Aria leaned against her shoulder, breathing even now, her earlier panic settling into something quieter. The weight of being listened to. The Joint Aviation Oversight Team arrived in under 3 minutes. Not TSA, not airline security. 3 people in dark navy suits without airline logos, moving with that clean, unhurried purpose that says they aren't auditioning for control. They already have it. "Gate 47 is now under federal review," the woman in front announced. Her voice was calm, no louder than necessary. "All Falcon Jetline personnel step back from the counter. Passengers remain seated. There is no threat to safety." The gate agent obeyed immediately. Veronica Pike did not. "You can't just take over my gate," she snapped, gesturing sharply, lipstick trembling along the edge where her mouth fought to stay composed. "This is a system glitch. Those girls." The agent beside her flinched. The oversight woman didn't. "Ma'am," she said evenly, "you're to wait in the conference room upstairs. Now." Veronica blinked, stunned that a single syllable could fold her authority so neatly. She opened her mouth again, then shut it when she saw 2 airport police waiting 15 feet away. Not aggressive, present. The microphone in her hand suddenly looked small. She placed it on the desk with a soft clack and stepped back. Across the terminal, phones vibrated in waves. The same push notification appeared on screen after screen. "Breaking. FAA confirms gray flag review at 9 U.S. airports. Source, Joint Aviation Oversight." Ava felt Aria's hand squeeze hers. "Is this our fault?" Aria whispered. "It's our responsibility," Ava answered. And even she seemed surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "There's a difference." A federal tech set a small case on the counter, unfolded a matte black tablet, and connected to the airport backbone with a cable that looked more like medical equipment than computer hardware. He ran a verification sweep. The display populated with rows of white text on charcoal gray. Initiator, dependent class, gold star, twin, confirmation origin, DFW Gate 47, FJ227 severity, ethics override, civilian impact accepted. He nodded once to the woman in charge. Verified. Chain pulse registered at all 9 nodes. 6-hour hold enacted. Airspace unaffected. Ground operation suspended for Falcon only. The woman looked at the twins, not with pity, with respect. "Girls," she said softly, "do either of you need medical attention?" Ava touched the seam of her cheekbone and shook her head. "We're okay." Aria, braver now that the room had learned to listen, lifted her chin. "We want to go to D.C. for our mother's ceremony." "Will we still make it?" "You will," the woman said. "Just not on Falcon." 2 more oversight officers crossed to the counter. "Replace crew for FJ227, one said. "New equipment, new captain. Transfer the manifest. Move any Gold Star passengers first when we resume." He paused, then added for the record. "Public communication stays factual. No speculation." Ava watched how the words moved people like handles on unseen machinery. No yelling, no threats. Just sentences that shifted the course of an entire morning. In the corner, Veronica sat rigid in a molded plastic chair, staring at her own reflection in the dark glass of the jet bridge window. She looked small now, smaller than the uniform that had once made her larger. The room had not turned on her. It had simply turned toward the truth, and that was worse. On the big board, numbers began to change. Hold, reroute, crew swap. The Fed tech annotated each adjustment, and the case next to him printed narrow white receipts of events, as if the morning needed paper to believe itself. The first estimate rolled in over the oversight channel, not meant for passengers, but too calm to sound secret. Projected Falcon losses for the corridor hold: 6 hours, 8.1 million in penalties, rebookings, and partner slippages. Secondary risk: priority lane suspensions at BOS and ATL. Ava didn't flinch. Aria did. "We didn't mean to ruin everything," Aria murmured. Ava shook her head. "We didn't ruin it," she said. "We stopped it from pretending." A man across the aisle, gray suit, the one who'd almost spoken earlier, finally stood. He looked at the twins, then at the oversight team. When he spoke, his tone wasn't performative. It was careful. "I didn't say anything when she hit the girl," he admitted. "I just didn't want trouble." He looked down. "That was my trouble." No one applauded him. It wasn't that kind of scene. But the confession found a place to sit in the gate, like a chair someone finally unstacked. The lieutenant from earlier returned with 2 slim envelopes. "Reissued boarding documents," she said, handing them to Ava. "Non-stop to DC, partner carrier. You'll board from a different gate once the hold cycles." "Thank you," Ava said. The lieutenant hesitated. "For what it's worth, your mother's file is marked with commendations I don't see often. She taught people how to make hard calls without raising their voices." She glanced at the badge. "Looks like she taught you too." Ava's throat went tight, but not from pain. "She taught us to hold our ground," she said. "Even if it means the ground holds everything else for a while." At the periphery, a local news camera edged near, lens lifted, reporter poised for a question. The oversight woman raised a hand without looking. "No interviews with the miners." The camera lowered. Another announcement rolled through the terminal. Calm, unhurried. "Attention! Falcon jetline operations remain paused for federal review. Passengers will be rebooked. There is no security threat. Please remain seated and await instruction." The word "remain" did a lot of work. People obeyed it the way you obey a tide. The anger that usually comes with delays didn't rise. Shame had crowded it out. Ava's cheek had stopped throbbing. She traced the eagle on the badge with a fingertip. "We pressed for respect," she said, mostly to herself. Aria heard her anyway. "And the world stopped to take attendance," she finished, a small, tired smile tugging at her mouth. Outside, a fuel truck idled, a line of cones bright against the concrete. Far down the concourse, an arriving flight taxied past with its cabin lights aglow. A floating city that hadn't learned yet that, just for a morning, stillness was policy. The oversight woman checked her watch, then addressed the team. "Mark the hour. Begin the ethics capture. Send the initial summary to FAA Council and Passenger Dignity Task Force. Note probable training lapses for Falcon senior crew." She looked once more at Ava and Aria, as if to make sure the room still saw what mattered. 6 hours, she said quietly, to no one in particular. "Long enough for people to remember why we fly at all." Ava nodded. Aria leaned in. Beyond the glass, 9 airports held their breath together, and for the first time all day, the silence didn't feel like emptiness. It felt like instruction. Washington, D.C., 1432 hours. The walls of the Joint Aviation Command Center shimmered under the reflection of dozens of digital maps. Red lines blinked across the continental United States, each one marking a frozen corridor of airspace. At the center of it all, General Marcus Johnson stood motionless, one hand resting on the edge of the operations table, the other gripping a secure phone. His expression was calm. That calm that only men who have seen chaos too many times can hold. The command room buzzed with restrained panic. Analysts murmured over feeds. Civilian liaisons shuffled papers they didn't need. Everyone was waiting for orders, but Marcus gave none. He just listened to the feed from DFW. Oh, confirmed Gray Flag Level 2 activation. Origin, Gate 47. Initiators, Johnson Twins. Dependents of Captain Elaine Johnson, KIA Helmand Province, Afghanistan. The moment the words Johnson Twins hit the air, the room fell silent. Heads turned. No one dared to look directly at him, but every technician froze in place. Marcus exhaled slowly, his voice quiet but steady. Patch me to FAA Command and Homeland Oversight. Priority Channel. Ava and Arya's father was not a man of many words. Even when his wife's convoy never came home, even when the folded flag arrived on his doorstep, his voice had never cracked. He had spent his career teaching others how to stay composed in storms. But today wasn't just any storm. It was his daughters who had caused it. He didn't feel anger. He felt something heavier, something that carried both pride and grief. He knew exactly what they had done, and why. The phone clicked. FAA Command. Administrator Hayes speaking. Hayes, this is General Johnson. There was a pause, the kind that comes when authority recognizes its reflection. General, Hayes said cautiously, I assume you've seen the feed. I have. Confirm the system integrity. System's clean, sir. Skylock protocol worked as designed. The trigger sequence originated from 2 Gold Star dependents. Your daughters. He didn't flinch. Then the system didn't malfunction. No, sir. It performed flawlessly. Another pause. A long one. Then Marcus said quietly, then let it stand. The room erupted at once. Sir, with respect. General, the economic fallout, airlines are demanding. Marcus raised his hand, and the noise dissolved. When a child has to remind adults what dignity means, he said, voice steady. The problem isn't the system. It's us. Every word landed like a commandment. He turned to the screen showing Gate 47. The live feed muted, but the image sharp. Ava and Arya sitting side by side beneath the blinking sign. 2 girls, silent, unmoving, unafraid. His throat tightened for the first time in years. They learned that from her, he murmured, barely audible. At the same time in Dallas, the oversight team had cordoned off the gate. Passengers had been rebooked. The Falcon Jetline logo had been replaced on every screen with a blank government seal. Ava and Arya were waiting in a private conference room now, a quiet space with gray walls and 1 wide window overlooking the runway. They could see planes sitting still in perfect symmetry. Arya traced a small circle on the window with her fingertip. Do you think he's mad? Ava smiled faintly. Dad doesn't get mad. He gets precise. He's probably watching right now, Arya whispered. Ava nodded. He always is. She didn't mean it as comfort. She meant it as fact. Back in D.C., the call expanded to include the Secretary of Transportation, the FAA Ethics Council, and the Homeland Director of Aviation Security. Each voice came through layered, professional, but uncertain. Sir, Falcon Jetline is reporting 9 suspended hubs, estimated losses exceeding $8 million. They're threatening litigation. Marcus didn't blink. Then they can explain to the Senate why their crews failed to complete mandatory ethics compliance training 8 months ago. Silence. Someone coughed softly. The Homeland Director said, General, are you confirming internal negligence reports? I'm confirming that a culture of dismissal just cost them more than money. He pressed another line. Get me Falcon Jetline's CEO. The screen flickered, and Richard Hale, CEO of Falcon Jetline, appeared. Pale, sweating, his tie loosened. General Johnson, I was just about to call you. I'm sure you were. Look, sir, this is a misunderstanding. The employee involved struck a decorated child wearing a Gold Star badge. Hale swallowed. We're handling internal discipline. Marcus's tone didn't change. You'll handle systemic reform, effective immediately. All Falcon senior crew are to undergo mandatory ethics retraining before any flight departs U.S. airspace. File confirmation with the FAA within 24 hours, or your operating license will be frozen. Hale blinked, stunned. You can't just... I can, Marcus said quietly, because my daughters just reminded you how federal oversight actually works. In Dallas, the oversight lieutenant re-entered the small waiting room. Your father's on the line, she said softly. Ava stood, straight-backed, eyes bright. Arya followed, hands clasped tightly. The screen blinked, then his face appeared. Tired, calm, proud. Hey, you two. Dad, Arya whispered. Are you hurt? He asked immediately. Ava shook her head. Just my pride. He smiled faintly. Good. That's the right part to bruise. For a few moments, no one spoke. The silence between them wasn't heavy this time. It was full of things none of them needed to say. Then Marcus said quietly, I saw what you did. Your mother would have understood. Ava blinked hard. She told us to stand tall. You did. He straightened, the commanding tone slipping back into his voice. Now, listen carefully. This system you triggered, Skylock, it was built to protect honor when institutions fail. It was never about punishment. It was about pause, about making the world stop long enough to see itself. Ava nodded slowly. It worked. He smiled. I know. Back at Falcon Jetline headquarters, alarms were still ringing. Legal teams scrambled. Communications executives drafted half apologies that already sounded empty. The company's internal chat feed lit up with disbelief. Screenshots of the viral clip, headlines about the Gold Star twins, and whispers that the FAA itself had intervened. But for Marcus Johnson, this wasn't a story about scandal. It was about his daughters finishing the lesson their mother started. He ended the call to the FAA with a single sentence that would later make the front page of every aviation journal. They didn't crash a plane. They grounded Arrogance. In Dallas, Ava stood by the window with Arya, watching the first plane roll again. The ground crew moved slower now, deliberate, respectful. Arya pointed. They're flying again. Ava nodded. Not like before. Why not? Because now they know who's watching. She didn't mean her father. She meant everyone. The next morning, the sun rose over 9 airports, still recovering from the most expensive 6 hours in Falcon Jetline's history. The terminals were quiet again, but it wasn't the same quiet as before. This time, it was the silence that follows a storm. Heavy, reflective, humbled. At Falcon's gleaming glass headquarters in Atlanta, the executive floor looked like a war room. Phones buzzed, lawyers whispered, and an entire PR team sat pale-faced around a table littered with coffee cups and half-written apologies. $12.4 million, that was the latest internal estimate. $12, $4 million in contractual penalties, flight cancellations, and frozen partnerships. And that didn't include the damage they couldn't quantify, the viral outrage, the collapsing stock price, the disgusted sponsors quietly withdrawing their offers. On the far end of the conference table, Richard Hale, Falcon's CEO, stared at the muted screen showing a still image from Gate 47. Veronica Pike's hand raised mid-slap, frozen in the moment that destroyed everything. Beneath the photo, a CNN headline read, "The slap that grounded 9 airports." He exhaled sharply, jaw tight. "Take it down," he said. "Sir, it's everywhere," one of the PR directors replied. "We can't stop it. It's been viewed over 70 million times in 10 hours. Hale rubbed his temples. "Then start with containment. We issue a statement." A lawyer spoke up from the corner. "Before we issue anything, the FAA has requested an emergency board appearance. General Marcus Johnson will be there." Hale's head snapped up. "The father?" "Yes, sir. And the Deputy Secretary of Transportation." The color drained from Hale's face. Jesus Christ. Meanwhile, halfway across the country, Gate 47 had become a shrine of sorts. The terminal reopened, the lights restored, and the world moved again. but passengers still slowed when they passed. Someone had left flowers on the floor beneath the window where the twins had sat. A single note taped to the glass read, "Dignity isn't a luxury seat. It's a right." Ava and Arya didn't see it. They were already in Washington, preparing for their mother's ceremony. But the photo of that note was already trending under hashtag #GrayFlag47. The world had decided it wasn't just a protocol anymore. It was a movement. In D.C., at the FAA's Marble headquarters, General Marcus Johnson walked into the emergency board meeting with his uniform crisp and his tone composed. "Gentlemen," he began, "let's not pretend this was an accident." Across the table, Hale sat rigid, flanked by attorneys. "The gray flag system," Marcus continued, "was designed for one purpose: to prevent ethical negligence from becoming normalized. 2 children shouldn't have had to use it, but they did because no one else did." One board member leaned forward. "General, the financial impact," Marcus cut him off gently, "is the cost of silence. We've paid it before in blood. This time, it's just dollars." The room went still. Hale swallowed hard. "General, we're deeply sorry. I've already suspended the employee responsible." Marcus's voice stayed calm. "This isn't about one employee, Mr. Hale. It's about an airline that thought training was paperwork, not principle. A company that ignored bias education because it didn't fit the schedule." Another pause. Then he slid a folder across the table. "This is your record, Falcon Jetline. 7 overdue ethics renewals, 3 unreported passenger complaints, and 1 employee who believed humiliation was part of customer service." Hale stared at the folder but didn't open it. "What happens now?" Marcus folded his hands. Accountability. Back at Falcon headquarters, the dominoes began to fall. Veronica Pike's credentials were officially revoked by the Federal Aviation Ethics Division. Falcon's senior crew roster was suspended pending retraining. All flight attendants were required to complete new Dignity in the Skies certification before returning to work. And while Falcon tried to patch its reputation, the internet made sure the wound stayed open. Videos flooded every platform. Passengers sharing stories of small humiliations, overlooked respect, quiet discrimination that had gone unchecked for years. Each post carried the same tag, #Gate47moment. By noon, Veronica Pike sat in a small, sterile conference room, waiting for her hearing. Her eyes were red, makeup gone. Across the table, 2 agents from the FAA Ethics Board sat with tablets. "Ms. Pike," the first one said, voice measured, "you've reviewed the footage?" She nodded weakly. "Do you dispute it?" "No," she whispered. "Do you understand the classification of the individual you struck?" "I do now." "And do you understand the consequences of your action?" Her eyes glistened. It was one mistake. The agent looked down at the file, then back at her. "A mistake becomes misconduct the moment you refuse to stop it." Veronica broke then. Not with anger, but with the kind of tears that come too late to fix anything. Across the city, Ava and Arya sat in the back of a black government vehicle with tinted windows, dressed in their neat Navy uniforms again. They were quiet, hands folded in their laps. Arya turned to her sister. "Do you think she's sorry?" Ava looked out the window, at the buildings flashing by. "Maybe, but sorry isn't the same as changed." "What's the difference?" Ava thought for a moment. "Sorry looks backward. Change moves forward." Arya nodded slowly, letting the words settle. "Do you think things will change now?" Ava's voice softened. "They already did." That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, the FAA released its first official public statement. "Falcon Jetline will remain under federal oversight for the next 12 months. A nationwide dignity protocol review will begin across all U.S. carriers effective immediately." News anchors called it the gray flag effect. But among the people watching, the parents, the veterans, the quiet travelers who'd been dismissed one too many times, it wasn't just news, it was vindication. In Washington, General Johnson stood on the Capitol steps as the press swarmed. "General," one reporter called out, "how do you feel about what your daughters did?" He didn't hesitate. "Proud," he said simply. "They didn't demand vengeance. They reminded us to be better. The reporter pressed further. And what about Falcon Jetline's punishment? Marcus looked straight into the cameras. It's not punishment, he said. It's education, the expensive kind. Somewhere in a quiet hotel room nearby, Ava and Arya watched the interview on TV. Arya smiled through tired eyes. He's good at that. Ava nodded. He always was. They didn't cheer. They didn't celebrate. They just sat there, quiet again, the same way they had at Gate 47, because they understood something the world was only starting to realize. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it simply holds the world still until it listens. The city of Washington had never looked quieter. The morning sky hung in a pale winter blue as Ava and Arya Johnson stepped out of the black car, their small shoes clicking softly against the marble pavement of Arlington Memorial Hall. Rows of flags lined the entrance, their fabric barely stirring in the still air. This was the day their mother had waited for, the day she would finally be honored, not as a casualty, but as a name the nation would remember. Both girls wore navy blue uniforms, their gold star badges polished until they caught the sunlight. The world might have known them now as the Gate 47 twins, but here they were just daughters, daughters standing where their mother once stood in uniform, proud and unbroken. Inside the great hall, the sound of footsteps echoed beneath the dome. Rows of chairs faced a long white stage. Military officers, senators, and families of the fallen filled the seats. Cameras flashed quietly in the back, but no one spoke above a whisper. The air carried reverence, not spectacle. Ava and Arya walked behind a uniformed escort toward the front row reserved for Gold Star families. On the stage, a folded flag sat beside a framed photo. Captain Elaine Johnson, U.S. Marine Corps. Her eyes, captured mid-smile, looked like theirs. Arya gripped her sister's hand tightly. Do you think she'd be proud? Ava didn't answer right away. I think she'd tell us not to cry before the cameras do, she said softly. That made Arya laugh through her tears. General Marcus Johnson stood at the podium. For the first time in his long career, his uniform seemed heavier, not from medals, but from meaning. He wasn't speaking as a general today. He was speaking as a husband and a father. Captain Elaine Johnson, he began, voice steady, taught every soldier under her command that leadership is not loud. It's not the person who shouts the orders. It's the one who stands steady when everyone else wants to run. He looked toward his daughters in the front row. She taught that lesson again, even after she was gone. And when the world forgot, our daughters reminded it. The hall remained silent. No coughing, no shuffling, just the faint hum of cameras recording history. She taught them that dignity isn't something you demand, he continued. It's something you uphold, especially when it's denied to you. He paused, his voice breaking slightly for the first time. And I think we can all agree, she taught them well. When he stepped away from the podium, applause rose, not thunderous, but deep and deliberate, like a heartbeat shared by hundreds. Ava and Arya were called to the stage. An honor guard approached, carrying the folded flag their mother had once saluted under. The officer's hands didn't tremble. He placed it carefully in Ava's arms. For Captain Elaine Johnson, he said, for service, for courage, for dignity. Ava swallowed hard. The flag was heavier than she'd imagined, not just in fabric, but in everything it stood for. Arya rested her head against her sister's shoulder. She's here, she whispered. Ava nodded. Always. Outside the hall, a small group of reporters waited behind security lines. They weren't there for scandal this time. They were there for closure. When the ceremony ended, a young journalist, respectful, cautious, stepped forward. Miss Johnson, she said softly to Ava, you've changed how people see honor. What do you want the world to remember most about your mother? Ava glanced toward the flag in her arms, that she believed in quiet strength, and she passed it on. The journalist nodded. And you? What did you learn? Ava hesitated, then smiled faintly. That silence isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the sound of discipline. It wasn't a headline, it was a truth. That evening, the family returned to a private reception at the Pentagon's Hall of Honor. The walls were lined with portraits, generals, admirals, heroes from wars past. But now, in the center of the new display, a single image had been added. Gate 47. The photo of two girls sitting on the floor beneath the flickering gate sign. Hands joined, heads high. The plaque below read, "When dignity was denied, they stood in silence." And the world stopped long enough to remember. Ava stared at the picture for a long time. "It doesn't feel real," she said quietly. Her father stepped beside her. "Neither does change," he said, "until it's finished." Meanwhile, across the country, airline executives and federal officials were watching the same footage of the ceremony. In Falcon Jetline's headquarters, screens played the broadcast without commentary. The same hallways that once buzzed with excuses were now lined with new posters. Dignity is policy. Respect flies first. Every employee, from flight attendant to CEO, would now undergo mandatory quarterly ethics certification, a reform the FAA had named the Johnson Directive. For once, the company wasn't fighting the regulation, it was surviving it. Later that night, as the city lights flickered across the Potomac, Ava and Aria stood on the balcony of their hotel room. The folded flag rested between them on the table. Aria looked up at the sky. "You think people will stop forgetting?" Ava leaned on the railing. "Maybe not forever, but at least now, they'll think before they act." Aria smiled softly. "That's enough, isn't it?" Ava nodded. "That's all it ever was about." They stayed there in silence, watching planes trace lines of light across the dark, flying again, not above them, but because of them. In the end, the world didn't change because of anger. It changed because two girls refused to lower their eyes. And somewhere, beneath the stars their mother once saluted, the wind carried a whisper that sounded almost like her voice. "You did well, my girls. You stood tall." 3 weeks after the ceremony, the air above Washington felt different, as if the entire city was still exhaling from the event that had humbled the skies. For the first time in aviation history, an emergency protocol activated by 2 children had rewritten national policy. The ripples of Gate 47 had not faded. They had turned into directives, audits, and most importantly, a new moral compass for those who worked above the clouds. And at the center of it all was a single phrase that began appearing on every terminal wall, every staff manual, and every safety briefing across the country. Dignity is not optional. Inside the Federal Aviation Administration's East Hall, a special conference was underway. Rows of executives from every major U.S. airline sat stiffly in Navy suits, their badges clipped neatly, their expressions a mix of discomfort and awe. At the head of the room stood General Marcus Johnson and Administrator Hayes, surrounded by a backdrop of flags and a digital projection of the new directive titled the Dignity in the Sky Protocol, known internally as the Accord. Cameras from major networks were rolling, but the tone was not performative. This wasn't public relations. It was a reckoning turned reform. Hayes cleared his throat and began. 3 weeks ago, the world watched an incident that forced us to pause, literally and morally. Today, we put structure to that pause. He gestured to the screen, where bullet points appeared beneath the title. 1. Mandatory quarterly ethics training for all airline personnel. No longer optional. Every gate agent, attendant, pilot, and executive would complete an empathy-based education module certified by the Department of Transportation and Homeland Security. 2. Gold Star Passenger Protection Classification. Children and dependents of fallen military members would now travel under a federal dignity code that guaranteed safety, respect, and priority oversight in the event of misconduct. 3. The Skylock Protocol Public Disclosure. What had once been a classified emergency measure was now official. A nationwide system to monitor ethical compliance in civilian aviation, with direct accountability to Congress. And finally, 4. The Passenger Dignity Index, A new quarterly audit ranking every airline's performance in respect-based service. Those who failed would be publicly listed. The executives shifted uncomfortably as their screens displayed the initial scores. Falcon Jetline, of course, was ranked dead last. Hayes didn't smile. He didn't need to. The numbers did the talking. General Johnson stepped forward then, his voice calm and firm. "This isn't a punishment," he said. "It's a reminder. The sky doesn't belong to corporations. It belongs to the people who trust you with their lives." He let that sink in. "And trust," he added, "has to be earned every flight." The cameras clicked quietly, capturing a man who spoke like a soldier but sounded like a teacher. Outside the federal building, a small crowd had gathered, holding signs that read, "Honor flies higher," and "Gate 47 changed everything." Among them were flight attendants, veterans, and ordinary travelers who had seen the viral video and never looked at boarding gates the same way again. No shouting, no chants, just quiet presence. It was as if the movement had adopted Ava's silence as its language. Meanwhile, in a modest hotel room 2 blocks away, Ava and Aria Johnson watched the live broadcast from the couch, legs tucked beneath them. The flag from the ceremony still folded neatly on the coffee table. Aria tilted her head. "They're calling it the Accord now." Ava smiled faintly. "Mom would have liked that word." "What does it mean, exactly?" Ava thought for a moment. "It means an agreement between people who finally understand each other." Aria nodded. "Do you think they really do?" Ava's eyes stayed on the screen, on her father's face, on the airline executives taking notes, on the small print of rules that would outlive them all. "I think they're learning," she said softly. "And learning is how change begins." The broadcast cut to an anchor summarizing the reform. The FAA's Dignity in the Sky Accord officially mandates training and accountability measures across all major airlines. It's being hailed as the most significant ethics overhaul since the Airline Deregulation Act of 1978. And it all began with 2 sisters, Ava and Aria Johnson, whose quiet courage forced an industry to face itself. Aria looked at Ava and grinned. "We're in history books now." Ava shook her head. "History doesn't need to remember us. It just needs to remember why." Back in Atlanta, at Falcon Jetline headquarters, the new compliance director read the memo aloud to a room of crew members. The once arrogant hum of entitlement had vanished. "Effective immediately," she said, "all Falcon personnel will undergo empathy and ethics retraining. Bias behavior, verbal or physical, will result in instant termination. We are also establishing a dignity review committee to ensure accountability." She looked up, scanning faces that ranged from nervous to ashamed. "We're not rebuilding a company," she said. "We're rebuilding respect." In the back of the room, someone began to clap. Slowly, quietly, but others followed. For the first time since Gate 47, Falcon Jetline wasn't defined by silence. It was defined by acknowledgement. That evening, Ava and Aria joined their father for dinner at a small family diner on the outskirts of D.C. There were no cameras, no speeches, just them, the flag on the seat beside them, and the kind of peace that comes when something broken has finally started to mend. Their father lifted his cup of coffee. "To your mother," he said. Ava raised her glass of water. "To dignity," she added. Aria smiled. "To silence that changes everything." They clinked glasses gently. Outside, a plane passed overhead, lights glowing against the night sky, a symbol that flight, like justice, didn't need to be loud to be powerful. Later that night, as the city quieted, the FAA building glowed with the new inscription etched into its marble wall, a quote from the reform address earlier that day. "The measure of a nation isn't how high it flies, but how it treats those who travel beneath its wings." And beneath those words, a small bronze plate simply read, "The Dignity Accord, Estrana 2025. In a world that once glorified noise, 2 children had proven that silence, when born from integrity, could ground arrogance, awaken empathy, and rebuild an entire system. And somewhere, in a drawer by their bedside, A silver badge rested quietly in its case, its light no longer flashing red or gold. It didn't need to. Its message had already been heard. It began quietly, not with a speech, not with a press release, but with a ripple that stretched across the world's skies. 3 months after Gate 47, airports from Tokyo to Toronto began updating their signage. It wasn't flashy or branded, just 3 words, printed in every language above every boarding gate. Dignity is policy. In London, Heathrow's board of directors gathered in a glass conference room overlooking the runways. The British Civil Aviation Authority had just voted to adopt the Dignity Accord, the same framework born from the Johnson case in the United States. "The Americans got this one right," one executive said, adjusting his tie. "The protocol works. It doesn't punish airlines. It protects people." By the end of that week, 16 countries had joined. By the end of the month, 23. And when the international headlines called it the Skylock Revolution, even the most skeptical carriers began to fall in line. Meanwhile, back in Washington, a quiet event was taking place in the FAA's Global Aviation Ethics Hall. It wasn't open to the public, but every major network carried the broadcast. The title on the screen read, "Global Passenger Ethics Forum, the Gate 47 Address." The crowd hushed as 2 figures stepped onto the stage, Ava and Aria Johnson, dressed not in uniform this time, but in simple gray suits. They were 12 years old, but the silence they carried filled the hall like command. Ava stepped up to the podium first. Her voice was calm, practiced, but real. 3 months ago, she began, the world stopped because one person forgot what respect looks like. We didn't stop her out of anger. We stopped her because silence needed to end. She paused. Cameras flashed softly, but no one interrupted. This isn't about airlines. It's about how easily we forget that every badge, every uniform, every seat has a story behind it. Some stories end quietly. Some are taken before their time, but all of them deserve to be seen. Aria joined her, her smaller hands gripping the sides of the podium. "Our mom taught us that strength doesn't have to shout. It just has to stand. So that's what we did." Ava smiled faintly. "And that's what this accord means. It's not just a rule. It's a reminder that dignity flies higher than any plane." The room rose to its feet. The applause wasn't thunderous. It was steady, measured, full of gratitude. That was how the world remembered Gate 47, not as outrage, but as reform. Outside, in the lobby of the hall, new glass panels had been installed, each etched with the names of the first 23 nations to sign the Passenger Ethics Accord. Beneath them, in gold lettering, a final inscription read, "In memory of Captain Elaine Johnson, and to the quiet courage that grounded arrogance." Across the ocean, at Haneda Airport in Japan, a flight attendant stood beside a small boy wearing a pin of his father's military emblem. When another passenger asked if the boy was lost, the attendant smiled softly. "No," she said, "he's right where he belongs." And at Toronto Pearson, an elderly woman in a wheelchair found herself escorted personally by the gate captain after a delay. "Company rule," he said. "The new dignity compliance thing." She chuckled. "It's about time someone remembered manners." Small moments. Quiet corrections. The kind of reform that doesn't trend anymore, because it's become normal. Back home in Virginia, Ava and Aria sat under a wide oak tree in their backyard. The late afternoon sun poured through the branches, the air full of cicadas and peace. The silver Skylock badge rested in Ava's lap, no longer blinking. Aria glanced at it. "You ever think we'll need it again?" Ava shook her head. "I hope not, but I'll keep it close, just in case the world forgets again." Their father stepped onto the porch, sleeves rolled up, a rare smile softening his usually serious face. "They're calling it the Johnson Accord now," he said. "You two made the world stand still long enough to remember what decency feels like." Aria giggled. "Does that mean we're famous?" Marcus laughed quietly. "No," he said. "It means you made history. That's better." Later that night, the 3 of them sat watching a live news feed from Brussels. the final signing of the Global Passenger Ethics Accord, now joined by 41 nations. The screen showed rows of officials placing pens to paper beneath banners of blue and gold. When the camera panned out, the background displayed an enormous mural of two girls sitting side by side at a quiet gate, hands joined, heads high. "Gate 47, Ava whispered. "That's us." Her father nodded. "That's everyone who ever stayed quiet when they shouldn't have." In the closing minutes of the ceremony, the moderator's voice carried through the broadcast. For the first time in aviation history, ethics will be treated not as policy, but as infrastructure, a system that ensures respect as fundamental as fuel. Then the room applauded again, standing beneath a single banner that read, "The sky remembers." When the cameras shut off, the world went on flying, but differently this time. Flight attendants lowered their tone when passengers asked questions. Gate agents looked people in the eye. Policies were rewritten. Videos were deleted before they could become the next viral scandal. And every time someone looked at the small Skylock emblem pinned to a uniform, they remembered the story of two girls who grounded arrogance and lifted dignity. As the night deepened over Virginia, Ava placed the badge back in its box and closed the lid. "We're done," she said softly. Her father smiled. "You didn't end something, Ava. You started it." Outside, a plane glided across the moonlit sky, its lights steady, its engines low. And for the first time in a long time, the sky didn't just carry people. It carried memory. It carried meaning. It carried respect.